Hello, this is Ada May, and I'm going to be explaining the quotes and images that I picked for the 10 Little Indian theme project for CRE101 with Professor Corbin. So, the theme that I chose was alcoholism, and the short story I chose is What You Pawn I Will Redeem, because I thought that that one fit the theme I chose the best out of all the options. So the first quote says, Rose of Sharon Jr. and I carried out a $20 bill and our $5 in loose change over to the 7-Eleven and spent it to buy 3 bottles of imagination. We needed to figure out how to raise all that money in one day. So this quote represents the theme of alcoholism because it highlights how the author spent all of his money just to even think efficiently before he could do anything. And that's a picture that I tried to look for, was somebody who can't seem to function without alcohol. The second quote is, Junior was passed out beside me, covered in his own vomit or maybe someone else's vomit. And I chose this quote because I think it really highlights the dark reality of alcoholism. And then that's the picture I chose because I didn't want to put something too graphic with the dark reality, but I think that one highlights the mental image well enough. Moving on, this quote says, but you have to stay sober to sell it, and I'm not always good at staying sober. And the image I put was the road to recovery, because I know that the road to recovery is a big part of alcoholism or any addiction at all. Because there's a lot of pressure on yourself, on the addict and everybody around them. So I thought that was related to alcoholism. And then the next quote says, as an alcoholic Indian with a busted stomach, I always hope I can keep food in my stomach to stay alive. And I put a question of a homeless person who said that they needed money for weed, drugs, and alcohol. And I said that it can be hard to be homeless. It can be hard for homeless people who suffer from addiction to get money because people just think they're going to waste it on drugs and hard substances. And the next quote says, thank you, I said, and I gave her one of the bills. This represents how it is a common misconception that all alcoholics are aggressive, angry, and selfish. But the narrator in the story was actually very kind and selfless and generous with his money, despite not having any for himself. The next quote says, how much for a whiskey shot? I asked the bartender, a fat white guy. You want the bad stuff or the badder stuff? He replied, as bad as you got, $1 a shot. I laid my $80 on the bar top. And I think that this quote represents the theme along with the image as well, because alcohol can really impair your judgment. And he was supposed to be saving money, but he was spending it very quickly. Moving on to the next quote, it says, Indian alcoholics are either sprinters or marathon runners. And for me, that meant that they're taking two different routes to get to the same place, which is just intoxication. That's why I picked a picture of two roads that lead to the same place. Moving on, so nearly blind with alcohol, I stood alone at the bar and swore I'd been standing in the bathroom with Irene only a minute ago. And I picked that image because it shows how alcoholics may have trouble with time passing, or comprehending that time is passing that quick, because the narrator is struggling to comprehend how he is at the bar again when he was in the bathroom with Irene just a couple moments ago. Moving on, the waitress at the restaurant asked the narrator if they wanted separate checks, and he said no, that he was paying for it. And despite the fact that the narrator has little money, he continues to spend it on strangers because he's very generous, and that's why I put a picture of a generous homeless man as the image to represent the quote. Next, this is the final quote. I stepped off the sidewalk into the intersection. Pedestrians stopped, cars stopped, the city stopped. They all watched me dance with my grandmother. And I picked this quote because it represents the story as a whole. The whole goal is to be reunited with some memory of his grandma. And that's why I put the picture that represents the entire story as a whole. And then here's my works cited with my 10 sources, as well as my one source from just the book for the project. Thank you.